All right. So to do the glass material, since we kind of know ahead of time we're going to be doing a layered setup where we do want to build a couple materials together. We're going to hop into Hypershade and we're going to start off just by creating that Pixar layered surface. And what I'm going to do is just make a completely new tab. Hopefully you guys have been kind of using that, as you've gone through these last few labs here. But make a new tab, label it for whatever the material is, and then we're going to load in the Pixar layer surface, just like last time. I love how Maya just throws those everywhere. That's wonderful. So let's just try to reorganize this thing real quick so it sort of looks like this. So once you make your Pixar layer surface, the material should kind of be on the right side with the little shading group on the far right. You have the layer mixer. Do you guys remember what this was doing? Like, how would you describe this? Like, what was the whole point of the layer mixer? Yeah. So the layer mixer is sort of like your layers in Photoshop, like just determining the layer order. This is where you guys had your mask connection. Like this is how you're putting in the alpha to sort of figure out where you show one layer and where it sees through to the layer beneath it. So this is your sort of where the layers combine together. This determines how they combine together. These are the individual layers. So you want to think of these as your separate materials. This is one material, it has its own attributes. This is another material, it has its own attributes. They combine together here and then sort of output into the final material, which is really just a collection of everything. What I think I want to do first, actually let me name this too, glass material. On the Pixar layer mixer, let's make sure that since we are starting off with this second layer that's already enabled, just turn that off, right? We don't want to look at the second layer yet. So hit enabled, check it off. No layer 1 at the moment. We're going to work off the base layer, which would be, in this case, you can see the base layer is Pixar layer 1. That's this guy. We're just going to rename that. I'll call this glass layer. And at some point, that will probably update. Yeah, eventually it will. There we go. So yeah, I'm just kind of renaming the layer, glass layer. We'll get to this guy in just a little bit. So with this material, like the glass is extremely easy to build. Almost like so easy that you feel like something must be wrong. Like it shouldn't go this smooth. So what you guys did with the MIA Material X, like again, kind of back to shading and lighting, obviously you cranked up transparency, right, because you want it to be see-through. Do you guys remember hitting the Fresnel Reflection checkbox, like down in BRDF? Yeah, you did. If you didn't, you're probably supposed to. You turned that thing on. That was kind of giving it the right type of reflections on the outside. This one's pretty straightforward. So let me just kind of assign this material to the bottle. I'm going to just click on that layer. So I'm just clicking on this guy, going in here. And you can kind of tell immediately that if there's a section just called glass. So if you go into it, we have an enable checkbox. We have some different gain sliders, refraction color. That's going to allow us to tint the glass. You guys already kind of know what roughness does. We've used that a few different times. So let's just try turning this on first. So let's go into the glass section on that layer, hit enable, because obviously we do want glass. Now the gain sliders, these are going to be used to sort of create, think of it as like the amount of refraction that you want to see. Like, do you guys remember what refraction stands for? Like what the difference between is like a reflection and a refraction? I mean, you all know what reflection is, I would hope. What's that? Right. So reflection is like all the stuff we've done before. It's really just like your spec, like how much light's bouncing off it. Do you see a highlight from the light source? Is it reflecting the sky above it? That's all that is. How much reflection do you want to see on the glass? This is how much you want to see through the glass. You can almost think of it kind of like a tinted window effect. Like if you didn't have the gain all the way up, you can't really see through the glass at 100%. So it kind of gives it like a shaded effect. like again, like tinted glass windows for a car. But let's just kind of crank both gains up all the way to 1. I usually start off just by cranking them up. If it is too reflective or too see-through, we can always kind of ease them back. But we're going to start off just by jacking those guys up. And I'm going to try doing a render just to see what this looks like at this point, just with this stuff. So let's give that a shot. Now there's a couple things going on here. So I've got it rendering, and you can kind of tell that it sort of has a glass look. Like there's something, it's not like just a gray default, right? Something is definitely different, but it has like a weird smokiness to it. Like it's not really allowing us to see through it all the way. And the first time when I made this material, this sort of threw me off because I was expecting if you made it glass and transparent, you'd think like immediately you'd be able to see through it. Then you guys think you know why it's doing that? Like what that gray is that we're seeing? That smokiness? Yeah, it's the diffuse. So if you go back to that layer and then just kind of look at the top, diffuse is still on. Now, there's a couple ways to handle this thing. You could just like slam the gain down to like shut it off and turn it to black. It won't do anything. But I mean, if you think about the diffuse at all, I mean, what is diffuse again? Like, what is a diffuse material property? Yeah, your color, like your texture, right? Like the wall texture. I mean, when you're doing glass, can you think of any reason why we'd want a diffuse color? You sort of like. I mean, we definitely want stained glass or colored glass. We could do that by putting a color in the refraction colors. This would actually like tint it when you look through it. But since diffuse color is really just like a textural effect, like on an opaque surface, we don't really have that. Now, we are going to be putting like dirt and labels and stuff on top of the glass, but we're doing that with a completely different layer. Like this eventually will be like the label. I don't really need this to have any diffuse information at all. So we're just going to uncheck enable on diffuse. And you can see as soon as I just turn off the diffuse completely, like, oh, that sort of looks like a glass bottle immediately. Yeah. Good question. So what she's talking about is over here, you're talking about on the main material, right? Do we have to go in there and under primary spec, do this little artistic to physical thing? So right now we don't have to. Because we're working on the glass. And if you kind of look at, let me go back to this layer again, you can kind of see how there aren't really any artistic or physical controls. It's just like how transparent do you want it, how much reflection do you want, what's the color. So this whole area doesn't use any of that stuff at all. However, eventually when we put a label on top of it, we might want to give the label like a shininess, kind of like how we did with like stickers and the wall and the cardboard. So this layer, we may want to use it because if this is like a label or dirt, that probably would have like some type of specular property on it. So what we could maybe do just to knock it out of the way is let's just go to that glass material, like the main one over here. Go to your primary spec and just change that to physical. It's just one less thing we have to worry about later. Have any of you guys been going through the RenderMan help docs, like as you've been kind of like clicking through things? Like that button right there? That little question mark looking thing? Yeah, if you guys still haven't been going in here yet, just because I know there obviously are a lot of different things we're talking about, and we're not going to go through the whole material, I would really still highly recommend going into their doc someday, just sitting back and kind of reading through some of this stuff, because again, there's so many just good examples that they kind of have nested in here. Lots of really cool stuff. A lot of it's under the rendering for Maya, but they probably even get into the glass stuff way farther down in here. Yeah, glass parameters. Okay. So you can tell, like at first glance, that looks pretty solid. Didn't really take a whole lot of work to do that. Now, if I go back to that layer, again, think of these like intensities, and what you guys are going to want to do with those two, only fade them back if artistically you don't like how reflective it is. So if the highlight's too bright, so like let's say that you're doing a really old dusty bottle. Should it, like if the bottle's been sitting there for a bit and it has a lot of dust and things building on it, do you think it would be that reflective? Probably not, right? Like there's a lot of things on it that would prevent it from doing that. So you could artistically pull some of these back. Like if I lower the reflection gain, just kind of watch the highlight. And let me actually get a crop on this too, so I'm not rendering the whole thing. There we go. So let me take the reflection gain. We'll do 0.5. I'm not gonna, there we go. See how those highlights are really like fading away? And if you take the reflection gain all the way to 0, there's no reflections at all. You're getting the see-through effect, but you're not getting any reflections on top of the glass, which looks a little weird, right? You really wouldn't want that. So we'll bring that back up to 1. But it's the same thing with the refraction gain. If you fade this guy back a little bit, you'll notice it's similar to reflection where you're fading out your ability to look through the glass, and now we're getting that darker tinted effect. So let's put that back up to 1. Now down here we have refraction color. I think a lot of you guys will probably be using this one. This is where you can put in your color or maybe even a pattern if you want to do a stained glass effect. And I'll just go in there and pick some random color. I'm going to ask you guys what color you want. Are we going to go pink again? No, thank you. We're not doing pink. So magenta, yes, so different. Yeah, let's do more of like a green, kind of a teal or something. Oh, okay. Now, I want you guys to kind of see something interesting here. Look at the color I picked, and look at the bottle. Yeah, what is going on here? Now, it's working, right? I mean, it is tinting it a color, but you can tell we're getting a much, much richer version of what we picked. You guys think you may know why it appears to be a lot more saturated? This is not an error, by the way. This is intentional. So think of it like this way. If you, let's say you had a 2 liter of Mountain Dew, okay? And you're looking through like the volume of Mountain Dew. It's really rich and saturated, right? Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah, you're seeing a stacking effect. It's kind of, again, so if you have like a volume where you're looking through a lot of soda, you know how like when the Mountain Dew's in the 2 liter, it's very rich, or if it's Coke, it's super dark, almost black, you can't see through it. But if you had like a puddle of Coca-Cola on the table, what does it look like as opposed to the 2 liter? Yeah, it's tan, it's a lot thinner, right? You can see through it, and it's not that the Coke is magically lighter when it's out of the bottle, it's the fact that you're not looking through as much density. It's a thinner surface, so the color has a lot to do with how far and how much you're looking through. The thicker the object, or the more faces you're looking through, the more that color builds up, and by the time you get to the back. So it is like a stacking effect. Now, this just means when you're working on it, be aware of that, because the camera is looking through how many faces from front to back? 4. We have it with the thickness, 4 faces. 4 different faces are multiplying that tint, and it gets greener and greener and greener until by the time that ray shoots out the back to hit something, it looks like that. It's a way richer version of it. So they almost have like a Heineken kind of color to it right now. But you could go in there and you could pick, like the browns, if you want to do that kind of, that Dos Equis. You could even like pull the value down so it's a lot darker. Like that. Now we're getting that kind of more classic beer bottle. There we go. Now if you do want to go for something like that teal that I had before, let me go into a little bit more green. If you want to fade it out, like if this really is the color you were intending and you're getting that, all you want to do is just go into your HSV for the color and start pulling back that saturation a lot. So this almost is white. It's close, and that still is a lot of color. So it is really, really sensitive. So just kind of be careful about that. But I mean, if you guys wanted to, you could do like a texture in there. Some bottles have interesting gradients where it's like it starts blue and goes into clear, or maybe like there's the logo is part of the glass where it sticks out and it has a color on it. There's all sorts of really interesting ways that you could put textures in here to make it use different colors on different parts of the glass. So if you guys want to do that, I'm all for it. You know, I like seeing you guys play around with different things like that. What I'd recommend though is if you're shooting for something really specific, find good reference. Like look for a bottle online that you want to mimic, save it, and when you turn it in, if you're looking at something that's kind of more abstract, submit your reference photo you're looking at with your project. So when Shane and I are grading it, we know what you're seeing, and we can kind of look at what you created and compare that to whatever photo you found online. So there's your color. That's pretty straightforward. And what would the roughness do? I mean, just, oh, you have a question?
Yeah, well, I was wanting to know, like a frosted bottle, that can be
Nope. You may turn it down a little bit, but you're actually kind of, it's perfect timing because you're kind of segueing into what I'm going to talk about here, roughness. And that's what you're saying. So what was roughness for the specularity? Because you guys all messed around with it a little bit when you're doing the pulley and the scraper. What did roughness do? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a roughness to the material. The rougher the surface, the more the highlights kind of blur and scatter. No roughness. It's really sharp, like a clear coat. And it's the same thing for glass. Now, it does start at 0.1, which is kind of a really good, I guess, default value. It looks pretty believable, even though it's kind of grainy right now. And if I bring it down to 0, it's going to be really sharp. Like almost too clean, where it's like it doesn't look great. If you go way higher than that, like if I get into like 0.7s, 0.8s, now we're getting into the frosted glass territory. Now this is probably even overkill for frosted glass, like 0.75. But you can tell just by looking at it, if you imagine like putting your hand on it, it just looks like it would feel kind of like sandpaper, like really, really gritty. And that's all I did is crank up roughness. So this can like give you a lot of really interesting effects because all of these can use a map. Like a texture could be put on any of these guys. So let's just kind of look up an example. Let's say we were trying to find some interesting reference, like frosted glass. So with something like that, maybe some of you guys do like environment modeling. You want to do some of those interesting kind of frosted windows or sliding shower doors. Now, looking at this, do you already think you can visualize what that texture would need to be for roughness to do that? Because all it is variations of roughness. Like that number slider I'm moving around just needs to have different values to create the smooth part and the blurry part. So just think of it like this. With roughness 0 to 1, if you wanted the glass to look like this, what would the roughness be to do that? 0, right? So what is the color for 0? Black. This area, what do you think you'd maybe guess the roughness might be for the other part? Yeah. 0.7, 0.25, like 0.1, like 1. I mean, you don't really know until you render it, but it's definitely a lot higher than 0. So even if you guess like 0.7, what does the color 0.7 look like? Yeah, like a light gray, right? So if you understand that, you already know exactly what this texture should look like to do that. If you can make a texture that has horizontal lines where it's black with these thin strips of light gray, and you plug that into roughness, it will do exactly what you're seeing right here. That's it. So, I mean, we could even do that in Maya super quick if you want. So here's an example of me doing that same thing. Do you guys have the same problem, by the way, when you hit tab and you start typing, it jumps off the type box? That's driving me nuts. I don't think it's my touchpad. Maybe it is a touchpad. Anyway, with the ramp, you can see right now this is more of just like a vertical gradient. I go over here, rough, crisp lines. So what I would do for this case is maybe do no interpolation on the ramp. This is the one that just makes it harsh color adjustments where it goes from one color to the next. There's like no gradient. And I could say, all right, if this is the bottom, which is a higher roughness, this would be the one that would be 0.7. Not that color. There we go. Black. And I could kind of drop in a few of these guys. Let me do here, there, there. I'm going to change a couple of these. So we'll do this black, black, black. And we'll do one more here like that. So I know it's not exactly like the image, but you kind of get the idea what I'm doing. These little like bands with the ramp. And I bet if I connect that, so I'm just connecting that to the roughness. I don't know if this is going to update. I may have to redo. Let me try relaunching my IPR. Oh, there it is. Yeah. So just by using that ramp like that, where I have those, again, those different kind of values where it's black and light gray, I have basically now done what we saw in the reference. And it all comes down just to thinking about what the numbers mean. And as soon as you understand what the numbers mean for the slider, you just relate that to color, and you kind of know the answer on how to do that. So that's kind of cool looking. So this, the ramp, that little like with the bands of color, I connected that to the roughness on that whole glass section. I'm totally going to get like 20 submissions now, like banded like rough glass. But you guys might be able to figure out something kind of interesting with that. All right. I'm going to disconnect it. So let's break that guy. I'm not going to use the little roughness map for now. And I'm just going to put my roughness back to like 0.1, which is where it was at by default. Okay. Now there is one more section for the glass. If you go down to advanced, there's this guy. You'd almost never notice it. It's kind of hidden. So a lot of you guys, when you do the glass, probably won't even go down here at all. But it's already set to a pretty good number. Do you remember what that was back from shading and lighting? Because Tony probably went over this with you a little bit. Well, you remember the number. Okay, you got that ingrained in you. Yeah, 1.52. What does that mean? Like, what is that number for? Yeah. Yeah, how it bounces and bends. Yeah, so the number you're talking about is like specific to glass. Like that, like I'm sure you all remember 1.52 for some reason. You all typed that in probably when you're doing one of the wine bottles for Tony. And 1.5 is really close to that. So the index of refraction is a number that is defining how much, like when the ray goes through a surface, how much do you want the ray to bend? That's all it is. It's like a thickness causing distortion. So glass around 1.5 is correct. So it's kind of convenient that by default, we don't even have to worry about it. It sort of just looks like glass already. But you could change it if you want. And if you look up, refraction indexes, it's not going to just give you RenderMan or Maya help docs. You're going to find all sorts of other different pages. Well, let's not go to Wikipedia. Britannica, that's fun. Oh, this Wi-Fi. This is just not going to happen. Okay, Britannica worked. It's basically doing things like this. When you have light or an eye ray going through it, depending on the thickness of this, like density and what the actual material is, that determines how much the ray bends. But this whole number, like where it's coming from, that number is related to this, the speed of light. It's just kind of coming back to physics a little bit. So light moves about 300 million meters a second, which it's hard to even wrap your head around how fast that is. Light is moving 300 million meters in a second. So when you hear, like, let's say you're watching some type of space documentary, when you hear someone say this star is 20 light years away, what does that mean?
I don't want to hear about your scientism.
Yeah, my scientism. It's all flat Earth. It basically means that at that speed, it still takes 20 years for the light to reach us from wherever the star is. But so the speed of light, let's say you're out in space, you're an astronaut, you're holding up your glass bottle. So in space, there's not really anything around you, right? It's just like the vacuum. There's no oxygen or helium, nitrogen. You're just out in the middle of nowhere. You hold up your glass bottle, the light coming to you from the sun is moving that quick. So what do you think happens when the light hits a glass material and it has to go through something when it's thicker? What do you think happens to the speed when it there's something here and it hits an object and has to go through it? It slows down, and sometimes it slows down a lot. So that change of speed when it hits something, like a glass, whether it's glass, a piece of diamond, plastic, it is going to cause the speed to change. And that change of speed, that's what's giving you the illusion of distortion. Well, not the illusion of distortion, like the effect of distortion. That's bending the light. So this means when you see something like this and you look up the index of refraction for like glass and it says like 1.5, it's telling you that the speed of light was 1.5 times faster in just open space as opposed to it going through a glass bottle. Diamond is 2.42, and I'll try that out. Here's 2.42. What diamond index of refraction would do is now, because it's changing speed a lot more, now it's really slow because diamond is extremely dense. It gives us a lot more distortion and what's happening to the reflection. Like, let me go back to glass. Look at that highlight. Here's glass. Because it's not just changing how the light distorts through it, the intensity of the reflection is way stronger, right? And we kind of know that because that's why people buy diamonds. And there's a whole moral side to that with blood diamonds, but diamonds, because they are so dense, and people want them just because the reflection off them is so vibrant that it looks pretty when it, reflects a light source. But there's your diamond. We've now made a diamond bottle. And if you wanted to, you could even go down to 1. Now, if you do an index of refraction of 1, this is going to kind of look weird. It almost looks like the bottle isn't there at all. Now, you can kind of see the color of it because I have a tint in the color. But if I put that tint to white, I wouldn't be surprised if this thing is almost completely gone. Yep, it's gone. Yeah. So when you put the index of refraction to 1, and if your color is still set to white, you can't even see it. Because what we did is the index of refraction of 1 is air. You've now made an air bottle. And because air doesn't really have a density to it, or it's so small that it doesn't matter, you can't see the thing there at all. So this, obviously, you could do air. That doesn't mean you guys are modeling the air between your objects. Like, that would be stupid. Don't do that. When do you think that you would maybe use something like this where you want it to be see-through, but you don't want it to distort what's behind it? If you like, maybe water. If you're doing an ocean and you really, it's so deep that you can't see what's below it anyway. Like, I would say that'd be fine. What about like, so the window over here? Like, we know that glass is distorting stuff, right? But when you look through it, do you guys see distortion? Because it's completely flat, right? So this means if you wanted to, if you were maybe more concerned about render time, by telling it not to distort anything, and if you just went up here and started like cranking up the reflectivity, you could fake glass with a lot cheaper render times by just telling it not to distort, because you wouldn't be able to really see it anyway, and it might render a little bit quicker. I don't know what that is. That's interesting. And sometimes you do have negative IORs, so, or lower than 1. If you start getting into like below 1, this is a very odd effect. You can tell it just looks weird. This is a situation where the speed of light is now faster going through the material than it was in open space. And this isn't really something that you see a whole lot, until you maybe get into total internal reflection. And you've all seen this before, especially if you guys like go swimming. This effect, like when you're underwater, you should be able to look out and see the sky, but to kind of notice how we're not seeing any sky at all, but we should. It's almost like a mirror. This is a total internal reflection because you're inside the dense material. You're looking out to the thin material above you. So because you're in the denser material this time, that actually means that the ray gets trapped. You can kind of see it at the top here, where if you have a really crazy glancing angle, the ray can't escape and it just reflects and bounces inside. That's a total internal reflection. We're not doing any of that. So after all that, let's do 1.5. So you guys don't need to really go in here, but I just kind of want you to understand what that is. It's just a speed of light number. It's a lot of physics. But you can always look that up online. It's pretty straightforward. All right, let's go back to my color here as well. Okay. Now what we're going to do to the glass is we're going to add some bump, and we're going to try to break up the roughness a little bit. I guess we'll start with the roughness. I'm not going to do, I mean, we saw the little ramp thing I did. That's fine. We're going to try something else, though. What I'm going to do for the glass, and what I want you guys to do in the lab, is I want to have it so the glass bottle has, like, fingerprints on it. So you know when you pick up a glass bottle and you touch it, you're not really leaving dirt on it, but you know how you can see those little smudge patterns? Like, what is that you're leaving on the bottle? Yeah, it's the oil from your hand, but it doesn't look like dirt. It's not a diffused color where your hands are covered in mud and you're just slapping it on the bottle. The oil is see-through, but because there's that little film of oil on the glass, you can just tell by looking at it when it reflects that the highlight's kind of distorting, it's blurring in a few different areas. We can do all of that just by playing around with the texture on roughness. So let's try doing that. What we're going to do is, over here in the hypershade, let's do File, Texture, and we're going to load in this guy right here. It's in the lecture project. This is also in that dirt zip file you guys downloaded. So if you have that zip file, this one I'm loading is dirt 47. But just kind of go through it. There are quite a few different textures that would work for glass. Some are like dust particles. We have some that kind of look like, you kind of get that soap scum and mildew and stuff on the window where it kind of streaks down. There's a couple photos in that folder that have like these interesting water staining and drip effects. But I'm just doing this guy, dirt 47. We're going to load that in. This is just a file just off to the side, not connected to anything yet. Now, what do I need to do to this file before I really connect it to anything? This is a black and white map. So what did we talk about doing to all of our black and white files? Oh yeah, well, let's knock that out now. Yeah, alpha's luminance. How many of you guys ran into that problem? Like fighting with it for 30 minutes and you missed one checkbox? Yeah, that's fun. We'll turn alpha's luminance on, so we don't forget that. Yeah, raw color space. We're almost there. What's the other thing we're missing? Yeah, attributes. Render man. Add texture control. Render man. And in this case, we don't hit it. It's, yeah, so every time you do a black and white map, like that, or an alpha, or even if you have a color file that you're turning black and white, like we've done with the ramps and all that stuff, any of those guys, this is the step you go through. The only change, again, for color, when you have a color texture, like the texture going into the color property of a material, like the wood, the pulley texture, those are the ones where you leave sRGB and you do turn that on. So you're still loading the render man texture controls every time. It's just good to get in that habit of doing it, but you're just swapping out a couple checkboxes. Put that back to raw. So raw format, not linearize, and we have color balance, alpha's luminance turned on. And I mentioned this before, but we're doing a lot of the same things, like a lot of repetition. If you guys get pretty good at scripting, you could automate this yourself. You could have a script set up so when you select a node, you hit a shelf button, it does all this for you in one click. So now what we want to do is figure out, should I just connect it to the material? Because I could just connect it to roughness right now and it would probably do something. But let's look at the texture. If I connect this thing in its current state, we're going to get, like, what is the white going to mean for roughness? Like all the white parts. Yeah, like super frosted. Like that, those fingerprints are going to give you the most extreme version of frosted glass you've ever seen in your life. Now, on the flip side, if you wanted areas to not be frosted, like you just want regular clear parts of the glass, what should the color be? Black, or really close to black. Because right now, my material is not actually using black. You can see it set to 0.1, which is a really, really dark gray. So we still want to have the control to play around with contrast, like levels, just in case it does look a little weird, too frosted. So next to that file node, let's make a ramp texture. Delete the placement node. And then take out alpha into your V coordinate of a ramp. And we'll call this glass, maybe oil or glass residue, I guess. And then over here, you know, if I'm just guessing, I do think it's too bright. So this is going to make it way, way too frosted. So I really want to pull this back quite a bit. I could like move the black over. You can see that sort of darkens it. I'm just kind of looking at the little swatch. You know, that's definitely getting darker. So maybe if I do this, I'd have a couple clear areas, which I kind of like. On the white, I'm just going to pull down the color. Because if I move the white over, see how that's going to make it even more frosted? Like, that's not good. That'll be wonderful. Just going to pull that down to like maybe 50% gray. And once you render it, you'll sort of know if it looks good. You can kind of play around with it. So I'm just kind of guessing right now. But I think that might be okay. So let's go over here to the material. There's our roughness. Oh, and so since I had it set to 0.1, and I kind of like 0.1 is having just a little bit of blur to the glass so it isn't too clean, what I would do over here on the ramp is, since this one right here is kind of my glass part, I'm going to change that black to the number 0.1. 0.1 value, which is like a really dark gray. So that might be okay. Let's go to the material. I'm just going to connect this to roughness. Drag that ramp over to the roughness attribute. And I have a feeling I'm going to need to Actually, that might be working. I think I'm already seeing it. Sometimes the IPR gets sort of stuck and you have to kind of just right-click on the button again to kind of get it going. But this one seems like it worked immediately. You can kind of see the little blurry finger smears on it. In the lab, I don't know how much this is going to stand out because you have different lighting conditions. But just kind of redo the IPR if you don't think you're seeing it. Make sure the alpha's luminance is checked on. That could have an issue where you're not seeing it because you didn't hit that one checkbox. But we're getting kind of a cool result. Like there are areas now where that highlight is now blurring over those areas, and we're kind of getting like an oil effect. And I didn't go in and look at where the texture lines up because we didn't get into the UVs and we didn't do the 2D placement to move it around. So there's probably oil inside the glass, on the outside, it's on the back. It's really all over this thing right now. And I'll kind of show you an example of this because I was kind of messing around with this before when we were doing I used to teach like the older metal ray Mila materials. And where is it? I'm trying to show you what that looks like. So this is a render I had done. It's kind of similar to the scene you guys have. I just added a bunch of stuff to it. It's pretty high res. But if I go look at this little mason jar, you can kind of see all those little like dry patches where like the light is scattering over these little like kind of like dried water and dirt on the surface. That's the same thing. It's just a roughness map. There's just a texture on the bottle to tell the highlight to blur in certain areas. And this whole guy right here, that's just bump. That's just a black and white image with like text like going into bump, and it's creating that beveled effect. All right. Now, if I wanted to, like if I was like maybe not happy with this thing, because the IPR is running, I think it's still running, I could probably go in there and move these guys around and just see what it changes. So if I make this gray lighter, we should notice that now even the clean parts of the glass appear a little bit more frosted. So it's kind of blurring it. And I could go to that guy, exaggerate that white to make that more frosted. I think you guys kind of get the idea. So it's just a little bit of trial and error. And just kind of playing around with the position of the points, the value, until you get like kind of a nice feel for it. Do you have any questions just about like the roughness texture, like using a dirt map to do that? What happened? You're not getting anything at all? No, roughness on glass. Like go to the glass area. Yeah, the same area where you did like the refraction gain and reflection gain, you want to put it in that roughness. All right, I kind of like that. Let's pull that back just a little bit. Okay. We'll kind of keep moving here. So there's roughness. Now the other thing we want to do is just add some waviness to the glass. Just give it a little bit of distortion. Because again, the glass bottle, unless you tell it to, is going to be like mathematically perfect. Because it's modeled like perfectly symmetrical on all sides. But when you really start looking at reference for other types of bottles, and these aren't even dirty. I mean, these are just regular, glass bottles here. I mean, do you guys see bump on that already? Or anything that makes you think that there's some variation going on where it's not perfect? Yeah. Yeah, like just look at these little weird refractions on the side. Like why? Like it's waving. You can see it because like it goes to black and then it kind of doesn't, like that. This doesn't really look that straight on the side. You can kind of see the bends on it. And every photo you look up of this that's not a render, it's going to be the exact same thing. all these guys wave and bend. Because when the glass is cooled, when it's in liquid form, it doesn't really cool perfect, so you end up getting a little bit of kind of distortion in there. This is usually pretty easy to do because all we want to do is have a really broad, like a soft, almost like a cloud filter effect, just to break it up a little bit. So we'll try doing that. We want to have something going into the global bump right here. So I need something for this guy. Now, what we're going to end up doing here is instead of us just doing another like 2D texture, like a dirt pattern, I just want like this overall waviness. So we're going to try using a 3-dimensional texture, which is a little different. So let's go into the creation area, look for this guy, and go under 3D textures. Now, do you know what the difference is between these two? I think I mentioned this a long time ago, earlier in the month. We didn't really get too deep into it. I mean, they can do bump, like a 2D texture. So with a 2D texture, how does that map onto the geometry? When you have a 2-dimensional texture, whether it's a file or a ramp or a checker pattern, what determines how that 2D texture goes on the object? The UVs. You look at the UVs, that tells the file where it appears on the model. These are different. A 3D texture has nothing to do with UVs. You can have the worst UVs in the world, it's still going to look the same. So this is not looking at UV data. 3D textures are a 3-dimensional effect. You can almost think of it like being a cloud of color. And depending on where the object sits in 3-dimensional space, that's determining what part of the texture it picks up. These are really good if you just want to do like this just general waving or something just to break up like a material. Like let's say you guys did the wall and you didn't make a bump map, but you can just tell in the render it just looks too smooth. You just want something really quick just to break things up. You would just apply this 3D procedural and play around with the sliders a little bit until it just feels like highlights are blurring and things are sticking out from bump. And I'm not going to get into all these guys. I'll let you guys play around with them. But we'll maybe do solid fractal. Like this one's a pretty straightforward one. So let's try solid fractal under 3D. And you'll notice that the solid fractal has a different placement node. 3D placement, not 2D placement, because again, it's a 3-dimensional texture. Eventually, I am going to connect this thing to bump, and we're going to kind of see what it does. But what I want to do is get the bump node next to it. So I need to connect this into a bump node first, and then connect the bump node to the material. So what bump do I need for this? Yeah, bump 3D, not bump 2D. Bump 3D. And just kind of a little FYI or tip about this, if you guys do bump 2D just by mistake, because you've done it a lot, if you put a 3D texture into a bump 2D, it'll still connect, but when you render it, you're going to see it's just not doing anything. It's going to act like the bump doesn't work. So you do need bump 3D. There we go. But it still connects the same way. Out alpha, the bump value. And make sure, since we're doing an out alpha connection, go to your solid fractal and turn on that alpha's luminance under color balance. I'm kind of digging that roughness map. Okay, let me save this too. This has been going a little bit too well. Save the scene. Hasn't crashed yet. All right, let's go over here, and we kind of already know where this is going to go. You can see right below the glass, there's that global bump. This is where you guys were connecting in all your other bump. Just middle mouse drag your bump 3D right into global bump. And oh boy. It's working. Just let that do its thing. My bump is cranked really high. So at the moment, we're getting some really crazy looking distortion. It almost looks like crumpled tinfoil or like aluminum foil, or maybe like ice, where it's really jagged and kind of cut up. So if you ever want to make chunky ice or glacier, apparently throw that in the bump and you're good. I'm going to pull that bump depth back a lot. And we can even look at the texture, by the way. So if that's already connected to the material, go to the hypershade, hit that S button on the solid fractal. That's like how we preview it. Hit the S and then look in the viewport at the bottle. There it is. So this is you seeing the solid fractal. And it again, just looks like almost like the cloud filter in Photoshop. I'm sure some of you guys have used that before. There it is. Almost the same thing. We're not really going to go breaking down what every slider is doing. Just look at it, and if you kind of move things around while you're seeing it in here, you can sort of figure out what you want to do. I think my issue with it is it's just a little too like grainy and kind of speckly, because the waves on the glass bottle are very broad and smooth. It shouldn't be like a bunch of small grainy dots everywhere. I don't know if you guys can kind of see that. See how like speckly it is? That's giving it a way finer bump. So I think the frequency ratio, if I just lower that down a little bit, see how it's kind of softening it? It's becoming blurrier. That might be a little better. But it's kind of trial and error. You can sort of just look at it. And another kind of cool thing about the bump as well is, since it's a 3D texture, if you click on that 3D placement node, you'll notice it's in your viewport. That 3D placement node is a cube. It's hanging out right at the origin. And if I move this up and down and scale it, watch the texture. I'm moving the texture by moving the 3D placement node. So you can go up and down. Now, obviously, you have to be careful about this, because if you had someone pick up the bottle, what do you think is going to happen with the texture? You have like a character picking up a beer bottle at the bar. He picks it up. If that placement node is not parented to this, you'll see all the waves on the bottle slide through it as he's picking it up. So you'd want to parent this to it so it moves with the bottle. But you could scale it. So if you wanted to, you could scale this up, make the patterns more broad, smaller. If I go really tiny, that would look great. So I'll do something like that. I'm just really blowing it up to make it a little softer and kind of broader looking. Yeah, now it's like even broader looking waves. They're really huge at this point. I just need to go in there and pull back the bump. I haven't done this yet. The bump 3D's value is still at 1, or the depth. Let's not do a value of 1. Let's 0.5. Even that's probably too much. Let's do 0.2. Because I don't really need that much of it. I just want a little bit of waviness to it. So I pulled that bump depth back a lot. It was just being cranked up too much. That's why the whole thing looked ridiculous, like chunky glass. Way too much bump on it. But if you guys want, you could do logos, like, you know, the glass Coke bottle where the Coke text is part of the glass that pops out. You could do like a black and white text image, save out of Photoshop, put that on the bottle, you'd see the text pop out. So there's a lot of ways to use this. You guys have like any questions about like the bump part, the 3D texture? It's just really experimenting with it a little bit. I think the main thing is pulling back the bump depth a lot, and then previewing the texture in the viewport, and just kind of moving things around until it looks pretty soft. But I do kind of like some of the waves we're getting, like, because now the side has these little kind of changes. So I'm kind of digging that. Okay. So we are completely done with the glass part of the material. It's just making the glass, which is easy, getting a roughness texture for some oil, and then using a three-dimensional texture just to apply some overall waviness to it. Now we can get into the label. So we do have this other layer kind of hanging out, and we disabled this thing a while back. So back on the layer mixer, let's turn on the other layer, enabled. It probably will turn gray, yep, because the layer is gray. I don't have anything on it yet. And I'm going to name this immediately. This is going to be label layer. And I'll kind of go in the documentation here so you can sort of see what we're doing. Yeah, we've done all the glass. We got that set up really easily. Ton of people in the documentations. Anonymous squirrel. Hyena, wonderful. We did the roughness thing. We just did the bump, like the 3D texture for bump. So the thing we're missing is this final part right here, is the second layer for the label. Now, we already had the layer there, so we didn't need to add another one. We just had to turn on the visibility. But I want this thing to look and feel like paper. And because I really want, like when you guys render it, to have that rougher appearance over top of a smoother bottle. So the first thing we want to do is just figure out, well, on this guy, what is the label, and how do I get that connected? So I do have something already in the project we can use. If you just make a file texture, you can load in my label. Now, please do not use my label for your project. I don't want to see like any of my lecture stuff in the lab. So like Eskimo pie, like on the box, don't use Eskimo pie in your project. Don't use my label. It's not that it's wrong. It just, I don't want to see it. I see it every month. Okay, so this is the label I'm doing. Oops, not that. I just made it in Photoshop. It's just a combination of a bunch of different text layers and dirt layers. Now, some of you guys, I think, may want to make your own from scratch. You can also find your own online. These are pretty easy to get. We just do like vintage, bottle, label. Some of these are templates. You can just kind of download a template like any of these guys and modify it. We get this witch hazel one quite a bit. Snakes, pickled crocodile teeth. Let's do that. Some interesting labels here. But yeah, just kind of go through some of these, see if you can find one that you like. Now, in the chance that you want to make your own, which could be kind of fun, I'll show you a couple ways you can sort of do that. Where is it? So I've got where's my dude? All right, let's load up my Braun image here. All right, that's Braun from Game of Thrones. But he's done in like the Grand Theft Auto art style. So let's say you guys have something like this where there's like a logo or some image that you have that you want to you want this to work as your label. Because remember, I want this to feel like paper. If you put that in the bottle, what do you think that's going to look like? Like, is it going to feel like paper? No, it's going to just feel like some normal plastic label over the top because it looks like smooth plastic, like a printed like vector graphic. So I want to give this the texture effect of paper. Now, it's not really that difficult because if you just go online and look up like paper texture, go to your images, we can find one that looks pretty solid. Let's do large size. And what do you guys think? That was not too bad. Let's see what that looks like. Love it. So this one kind of has some nice little kind of fibers to it. I like some of the dirt patterns on it. If I wanted more variation, maybe not do like the crumpled paper. That's going to look kind of weird, but I could pull that guy. You know, there's a bunch of other ones that would also sort of work. That one's not too bad. Let's try this one. This one looks super dirty. I like that. Yeah. I'm just going to copy this or save it, but just basically you're going to load that in Photoshop or open it in Photoshop. Here's my paper texture. Now, if I were to combine this with the other one, we can get some kind of interesting results. So if I just copied that texture, and I'm just pasting it right over top of this other photo, this other image. Oh, this is huge. Oh boy. Well, we definitely have enough detail. Scale that back a lot. So something kind of like this. So what I've got right now is paper sitting on top of this image that I'm trying to turn into paper. When I kind of create this stuff, I'm thinking about it like the way it's sort of really built. So when you put an image on a piece of paper, how is that applied to the paper? Like in real world, not Photoshop, but like how do you put any image on a piece of paper? Yeah, it's an ink, it's a stain, it's a print. So a staining effect is multiply. Multiplication is the same thing as a stain. This means if you put the paper on the bottom, just like you're starting with a piece of paper, I have my ink print on top of it, and I tell that layer to multiply on top of the paper. Look what happens. We're now getting that sort of staining into it. Now, the biggest issue with it at this point is while, yes, it is, I guess, technically doing it, it doesn't look very good, right? It just still looks like the paper is that beat up. I don't think the print should still look like that. The print should be in rough shape. It should be like partially rubbed off in areas, all blurry, you know, it faded from like sun damage. There are a lot of ways to break this up. And what I was doing to kind of do this for my label is I would go to the paper, go to my channels, and I'm just looking, actually let me turn this off for a second. There we go. Go to my channel for the paper. I'm just looking for a layer that has some interesting contrast. Like the blue channel has a lot of variation to it. If I use the blue channel, so I just copied it, I'm going to use it as a mask on this guy, my print, because I want to basically control it like fading out. So there's areas where it's missing. So if I made a mask, I'm just pasting that blue channel right in the mask. See how it's already changing? And now, if I wanted to, instead of it just being like a lot of gray and kind of dark, you know, variations of gray, I could go onto that mask like that, just load up my levels, and if I start playing around with the contrast, see what's happening to the print. So what I did is if you're on the paper layer, so go to your paper layer, go to channels, look at the channel you want to copy, like I did the blue, Command A, C, D to copy it and deselect it. Go back to your RGB, so you're going back to color, and then click back on the layers. And then what you're doing is, I'll do this one more time. Let me actually get rid of this mask. Delete. Okay. On your other layer for the print, make a mask on the layer. Hit that little mask button. And then go to your channels. Do you see the mask as a channel now? Yep. So turn the visibility of the mask on. Turn off your RGB. So you probably are just seeing white right now. And then Command V to paste. And then Command D to deselect it because it's probably still selected. And then you can go back to color. And you probably should see something like that. Like I don't know if yours is doing the same thing where it's kind of partially faded. A little. Yeah, it depends on what your paper looks like, but what I did, because mine's a lot of like neutral stuff, I really wanted to make it more severe, where there's a lot of pieces that were completely missing. All I had to do was on this random channel I pasted, I'm just going in there and I'm doing a levels on the mask and just doing this stuff, like making it lighter and darker. That was kind of giving it the effect of removing parts of the print. Something like that. And then if I really wanted to take it like a step farther, I could even go in there and like just throw some other levels above everything and just kind of play around with the gamma to maybe give it like a washed out effect, almost like it's been sun bleached or damaged just from being out, exposed to the elements for too long. And I could even link that to just the print if I wanted to. But I'll kind of let you guys play around with that. You don't have to make your own label. You can just totally find one online and use it. But I know some of you guys may want to try making your own, just for the fun of it. All right. So I have my file already kind of loaded inside of Maya. It's just a texture. Let's kind of add all our controls to this real quick. So this is the one where the color space is sRGB. I don't have the RenderMan controls yet, so add attributes, RenderMan, texture controls. Go down to RenderMan, and this is the guy that we do hit the linearized sRGB. This is a color file. And where do you think that would go on the label layer, on our label layer material, I guess? What attribute are we building right now? Well, we're just trying to get the image to show up as a label. Yeah, just diffuse color, right? It shouldn't be gray. It should be the image we want. So in that label layer, I'm just going to middle mouse drag my file right to color. And you can already see it, like my IPR is still updating. This thing's been pretty awesome today. It's showing me the label. Now it's in a terrible spot. Like that's probably not where I want it, but at least I know it's reading the image properly. So this is where I need to go in there and just work some magic with the 2D placement node. And if you hit the little S button on the file, you can kind of see it too in the viewport. Come on. Oh my God. There it is. Yeah, I mean, that does look like what we're getting kind of in the render view. I'll just try to do this real quick. It's way too big. Let me cut the scale down. And I'm just going to move it like 0.1. So that's not good. The width needs to come in. I'm trying to do as much as I can just by looking at it right here. 0.6. It's still, so my label is like getting, see, it's getting really close to where the neck of the bottle tapers in. I kind of want to move this down just a little bit. So this second guy in translate frame, if I do like a negative and a small number, that will kind of push it down. Let me see what that looks like. That seems okay. There's not really any trick with it. It's just you punching in numbers, watching it move around. You have a question, or are you stretching? Okay. Okay, so it's just me moving the label around. That seems like a pretty good spot. What now? My kind of issue here is that even though I do have the label, I need to get some type of alpha built, right? Because I still want to see through to the glass beneath it. That isn't working quite yet. And I also haven't done anything with specularity. I haven't done any bump. I want the label to have a lip where it pops off the glass a little bit. I could probably knock those out pretty quick. I am going to go to that file node and pull down the gain. I can even do it on the material. Like that particular texture I'm using just looks a little bright. So I think I might pull that gain down on my diffuse just to darken that slightly. There we go. And let's try adding some spec to it. What type of spec do you think you'd use for, a paper label? If I turn it on, we'll see what that does. I don't know if you can really see it. Oh, let's turn that gain up. Let me turn off my diffuse. It should be there. Let me try to do it. I'm going to redo my IPR. I think it's stuck. Oh, there it is. Yeah. So I'm boosting up my edge color. I forgot I had that at black. I turned off my diffuse just for a second, just so I can kind of see what the highlight's doing. Now I know it's on. It's not on the label specifically. It's just kind of generic highlight on the whole bottle. But what do you think you'd maybe do that highlight for something like paper? It feels kind of like plastic right now, right? Yeah, I could fade it out. I think the big thing is that roughness, because paper is pretty coarse. So let me just crank up the roughness a little bit on my primary spec. Yeah, I almost blurred that thing out of existence. And let me turn on the diffuse again. Yeah, you can kind of see it, like right here, about how broad that highlight is. It's pretty soft. That's okay. We'll maybe stick with that. I mean, I think the highlight for the paper is so subtle that some of you guys, when you start working on it, you may realize you don't even need primary spec. You just kind of get the color working and the bump, and it might still feel all right. But let's try doing the bump. So I got the color file connected. We want the label to pop off the surface a little bit because it's way too flat right now. So we're going to go over here, and I need to load in some type of alpha for bump. Now I do have an alpha already in the project we're going to try using here. So let's let's do a duplicate here. I'm going to click on that file node. So I'm clicking on my texture file for the label. Edit. Duplicate with connections. I'm going to watch my stuff just get scattered. Wonderful. All right. So again, all I did is just click on my file node, edit, duplicate with connections to network. I'm just getting a different file because I just need to load in an alpha. I'm going to need that to cut out the layer, and I can use that for the bump. And on that second file node, if you go to the folder for the lecture project, I already have an alpha built. That's what it looks like. I'm just going to use that. That's just going to cut it out into the shape of the label. And again, when you guys do this in the lab, you might just bring your label into Photoshop and kind of use the wand to select around it. You're just generating some type of black and white alpha, so we can kind of trim that up. And we'll load that in. All right, so who can guide me through all the different things I need to do to this file node for this to look right? What do I have to change on this guy? Yeah, black, right? We know it should not be gray on the outside. That's a huge one. Black color, not gray outside of that. This is a black and white texture. That should be raw color space. Alpha's luminance. We probably want that turned on. And under the render band controls, linearize is off. There's our black and white map. So it's already kind of okay. I mean, I guess I could, if I wanted to, do the little alpha to V coordinate and put it in a ramp. But I mean, with something like this, I mean, if you just look at the texture, because you know how we do those V coordinates to the ramps, we're just doing that because I want to do like a levels on something to play around with the contrast. Like, do you think there'd be any point to doing contrast on that? I mean, probably not. It's really just a black and white alpha. That's sort of like what I need it to look like anyway. I don't know why I would really do any of that to it. If I did levels on it, it might change that a little bit on the edge, but I don't think I need to even do the ramp at all. So we can probably bypass that whole ramp thing and just have this go right into the bump 2D node. So tab, bump 2D. Out alpha to bump value. And where would that node go? Like once you get that alpha going into your bump 2D, where does that bump 2D then connect to? Yeah, global bump. And let's see if that shows up. Oh yeah, that's doing something. That's looking super chunky on the side. We're gonna roll with it. Yeah, I can see a little bit of an edge along the label, so the bump is definitely working. Not sure how I feel about that. It's like a hamster chewed on the corner of the label. Make better decisions than I did with the alpha. That looks terrible. Or, better yet, if that looks bad, let's just go to that 2D placement and just move that around the corner so we don't see it. Just hide it from the viewer. So really, like the only thing we're missing now is like we've got the spec, so it's kind of dry. I've got the bump connection. And one thing I probably could have done, because you know how the bump was just like a solid white color against the black background? Like, what do you think you would change, like on this, if you wanted the paper to look bumpy? Because is the paper going to look bumpy with that? No, it's going to pop off the glass on the edge. What would be different if I wanted the paper to be bumpy? Yeah, right. It just means instead of it being white, it should just be some type of fibery paper, black and white texture. I'm not going to do that right now, but a lot of you might want to try it out, like taking a paper texture online, dropping that in the white, and that would make the internal parts look a lot more gritty. But we'll kind of skip that for today. So now we're down to the last part. I've got the label perfect. I had the glass layer working earlier. The only thing we're missing is getting that mask on there to cut out the label so I can now see through to the glass. So do we already have something that would work for that? Yeah, that same black and white alpha I had earlier for bump, that is the alpha to cut it out. It's the same thing. So I'm just going to middle mouse drag that black and white alpha image right into the layer 1 mask. So if you go to your mixer, look for layer 1. This is your label. There's the alpha or the mask. Just kind of middle mouse drag your black and white image right onto that guy. Layer 1 mask. Are you dragging that on the where it says layer 1 mask and it's doing that? Okay. I kind of want them to see what you're seeing because we haven't really talked about that yet. You guys, you're getting that thing, right? Do you guys all know what this is? Have you seen it before pop up at some point? Yeah. Usually when you see it, you feel like, oh no, like I've done something wrong. Like this isn't normal. So the connection editor, whenever you see this pop up, and it does happen quite a bit depending on how you're connecting stuff, this is Maya's way of telling you it doesn't know what you're doing and it needs help. Normally when you connect stuff, it does work, like color to color, alpha to alpha. It usually has a problem anytime you're taking like 3 channels, like color, and trying to cram it into a single channel, or if you're doing some weird UV connection, like a 2-coordinate system that's pulling from a single channel. Let me hop back there and kind of see what's going on with yours. But if you wanted to, you could actually go through the list and individually pick which attribute you want to connect. I come back here, I'm like, hit the button, and we go. I don't even want to help you. Yeah. See? Like a good copy. Yeah. Well, when you address, what do you know about drafting? I almost wonder. Yeah, it should have worked. I almost wonder if you can still have drafting. This guy. Into it. Yes. That should work. But if you load it up again, and redo it, I think it will work fine. Yeah. So like all that stuff. So this would be your color image. What you need to do is in Photoshop to see if you can get like a wand or something to select the outside, and you're going to try to basically do layers, paint black on the outside, and then if you invert the selection, you're going to paint white in the middle. So this should be fine. This is your color image. You're just going to have to use selection to paint black on the outside and paint white. That would be your job. All right. Sweet. There it is. So there is our glass bottle. How do you guys feel about all the stuff we just did today? Pretty good? Yeah. I think it's going to be good for you because you've already done this with the wall. It's just redoing this again with a different type of material. But I'm going to change a couple things on the activities due date because I know some of you guys have been going back from the critique and you're like tweaking a couple things with the pulley and the scraper. I want you to do that. Like we want you to go back and try to make revisions. So right now the deadline I think says Saturday at midnight. I'm going to push it to Sunday. So I'm giving you guys an extra day. We're not going to be grading over the weekend anyway. It's just going to give you an extra day to make some fixes, make some changes, and that way when you guys do submit it Sunday night, this thing should look pretty solid. And then what we're going to do on Monday, since we're kind of in the home stretch now, this was the last material in the project. Monday, we're going to be getting into passes. And passes, some of you guys may have clicked over here, just going through the render settings, just kind of out of curiosity. Do you all remember what passes are? Or have you seen them before and you've watched like a breakdown for a movie? You definitely know what these are. Do these things look familiar? Yeah, it's usually you see these when you're looking at someone's like demo reel and they kind of break down how they built the shot. Or if you watch a movie breakdown, they do like the compositor will kind of do all these wipes showing you like the light passes and the reflection passes. What we're going to do is take your full render you've got, We're going to break it up into different lights. We're going to break it up into different material properties, kind of like this. And then we're going to use those in Nuke so we can reconstruct the whole render from scratch, which is going to allow us to control individual parts of the material. Because when you break the render up into these pieces, this means if you wanted to, because the reflection is a separate image at that point, you could then change the reflection on something without having to go back in Maya. So it's almost like tweaking the render, but in real time. Like you're just in Photoshop or Nuke playing around with all the properties, doing lens flares, depth of field, glow, changing the light color, all that stuff. So just kind of make sure by Monday that you're at a spot where you feel like comfortable to do the final renders. I want to make sure everyone is like 100% good to go when we get to lecture on Monday. All right, pretty sure that's everything. Let me just double check the documentation, make sure I didn't miss anything. No, that was it. You had to save that guy out with higher quality settings, and that is your final render. Okay, so you guys are all set. We will see you in the lab.